Greetings, everyone. I am UDAY Sharma from the Triple Department of Institute of Aeronautical Engineering. Today, I am going to discuss about the topic General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, also called as GATT. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades is a legal agreement between many countries whose overall purpose was to promote international trade by reducing or eliminating trade barriers such as tariffs and quotas. According to its preamble, its purpose was the substantial reduction of tariffs and other trade barriers and the elimination of preferences on a reciprocal and mutually advantageous basis. Like, suppose, let us take an example, like a country is specifically more advanced in a particular region or a particular item or a particular sector, and the other country which is very weak in the sector. This general agreements on trades and tariffs allowed the exchange of goods, exchange of intellectual property rights with the with less tariffs or less taxes compared. This can be simplified. This can be said as a simplified version of what GATT or General Agreement on Trades and Tariffs is. The GATT was first discussed during the United Nations Conference on Trade and Employment and was the outcome of failure of negotiating governments to create the International Trade Organization. It was signed by 23 nations in Geneva on 30th October 1947 and was later, on a provisional basis, 1 January 1948. Let us see what is the history of GATT. The General Agreement on Trades and Tariffs, the Multinational Trade Treaty. It has been updated in a series of global trade negotiations consisting of 9 rounds between 1947 to 1995. Its role in Its role in international trade was largely succeeded in 1995 by World Trade Organization. The formation of World Trade Organization, one of the biggest success or the main success which can be held or told as a success of or the succeed is a large success of this general agreement on trade and tariffs. The rounds are based on the place or where it was. The names of the rounds were mostly based on the places which they were held, or based on the persons or the names of the persons who are associated with these trade agreements. The 9 rounds are Geneva round, Annecy round, Tokyo round, and this is the second round and the fourth round was also taken place in the Geneva. It's also called as Geneva 2 round, the Dillon round, Kennedy round, Tokyo, and Uruguay and Doha rounds. Let us see what are the rounds of GATT. Initial round or Geneva round. Preparatory sessions were held simultaneously at the UNCTE, United Nations Common Trade regarding the General Agreement on Trades and Tariffs. After several of these sessions, 23 nations signed the GATT on 30th October 1947 in Geneva. It came into force on 1st January of 1948. The Annecy round took place in the 1949 in Annecy, France. 13 more countries took part in the round. The main focus of the talks were more tariff reductions. Around 5,000 of the total tariffs based on the trades were reduced. The third round was Tokyo round, which was in 1951, which was held in England, Tokyo. 38 countries took part in the round. Around 87,000 tariff concessions were made, totaling the remaining amount of tariffs to 3 by 4th of the tariffs which were in the effect of 1945. That is, 1 by 4th of the tariffs were reduced. A quarter of the tariffs was reduced in the third round of this GATT, which was a huge success. The contemporaneous rejection of the US of Hanama Charter signed the establishment of the GATT as a governing world body. That is, many nations agreed the GATT as a governing body between the trades and tariffs. Geneva, or the second round of Geneva. The fourth round returned back to Geneva in 1955 and lasted until May 1956. 26 more countries took part in the round. Around $2.5 billion in tariffs were eliminated. That is based on the taxes or tariffs or trades from the one country to other country. Around $2.5 billion in tariffs were reduced. Dillon round. which took place in 1962-1962. The fifth round occurred once more in Geneva again, and they lasted for 1960 to 1962. The talks were named of the U.S. Treasury Secretary and former Undersecretary of State Douglas Dillon, who first proposed the talks. 26 countries took part in the round, along with the over $4.9 billion in tariffs. We also discovered in the discussion relating to the creation of European Economic Community or Community. The main part of this, or the main success, the main importance of this round was that EEC is formed, the European Economic Community is formed. The Kennedy round, and the most important round, has happened for 3 years. The sixth round of the GATT multilateral or Gatt multilateral trade negotiations held from 1964 to 1967. It was named after the US President John F. Kennedy, in recognition of his support for the reformulation of the United States trade agenda, which resulted in the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. In May 1963, ministers reached agreement on three negotiating objectives for the round: measures of the expansion of trade of developing countries as a means of further their economic development, reduction or elimination of tariffs and other barriers to trade, and measure for access to market for agriculture and other primary products. Let us see what are the effects of the Kennedy round, as this was the most important round in the Gatt or General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs round negotiations. The US tariff concessions involved around 8.5 billion worth of goods and foreign tariff concessions on import from the United States, which involved around $8.1, and 64% of the non-agriculture duty-able imports were covered by the US. Linear cuts with an average tariff reduction of 35%. Foreign tariff reductions were an average 34% and they covered 48% of their non-agriculture duty-able imports. Non-tariff achievements included the establishment of Gatt Anti-Dumping Code of 1967, which gave a procedural framework for negotiating dumping accusations and expanded upon the original Article 6 of Gatt. The round can also be seen as success for developing nations. A trade and development section was added to the Gatt Charter. Its most significant feature was exempting developing nations from the rule of reciprocity. It is also called as stabilization of raw materials. This can be explained as as I have said before, like if the developing nations has something a specialty or it is more advanced in, it has to share the less or developed countries or very underdeveloping countries, so they can become equal, or the economy or the trades can become stabilized. And furthermore, any exotic materials available in the least controllable exotic materials available in this least developed state had to be imported or traded to the countries which they are not available. Further, the agriculture grains arrangement provided for higher minimum trading prices as well as food aid programs to developing countries. Some progress was also made with the negotiation of commodities. The round extended with long-term cotton textile arrangement for under 3 years and provided frameworks for negotiating steel, aluminium, chemicals, pulp, and paper tariffs. These all were covered in this Kennedy round. Mostly there were food aid, like food trade between the developing countries from the fully developed countries or more developed countries. There are trades negotiations for aluminium, tin, chemical, or steel, or etc. on reduction of these tariffs. And the other round was Tokyo round. Reduced tariffs and established new regulations aimed at controlling the proliferation of new non-tariff barriers and voluntary export restrictions. One or two countries took part in the round. Concessions were around $19 million worth of trade. As we have seen earlier, the starting rounds only took off around 5,000 tariffs or around, and the next was around $2.6 billion. And this was more than that. In the around 1973 to 79, around $19 billion worth of trade was, or 19 billions worth of tariffs were exempted, or concessions were given to the $19 billion. The Uruguay round and is also one of the most important rounds in the GATT negotiations. The Uruguay round began in 1986. It was the most ambitious round to date as of 1986. hoping to expand the competence of the Gatt to important new areas such as services, capital, intellectual property, textile, and agriculture. 123 countries took part in this round. The Uruguay round was also the first set of multilateral trade negotiations in which developing countries had played an active role. The agreement on agriculture in the Uruguay round continues to the most substantial trade liberalization agreement in agricultural products in the history of trade negotiations. The goals of the agreement were to improve market access for agricultural products, reduce domestic support of agriculture in the form of price distorting subsidies and quotas, eliminate over the export subsidies and agricultural products, and to harmonize, extend possibly sanitary and phytosanitary measures between member countries. Gatt and the World Trade Organization. In 1993, the Gatt was updated to include new obligations upon its signatories. One of the most significant changes was the creation of World Trade Organization, which stands now as the head of all the trade happening around the world. In the 76 existing Gatt members and the European committees like EC became the founding members of the WTO on 1st January 1995. The 51 Gatt members rejoined the WTO in the following 2 years, the last being Congo in 1997. Since the founding of WTO, 33 new non-Gatt members have joined and 22 currently negotiating membership. There are a total number of 164 members countries in the WTO, the Liberia and Afghanistan being the newest members of 2018. As we know, all the trade happening around the world cross countries are taking place through the World Trade Organization to avoid any conflicts. So we can say that the formation of this World Trade Organization is one of the biggest and main achievement of this Gatt negotiations. So I would like to conclude this topic. This is Uday Sharma signing off.